Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Asian Dramaturgs Network event series for 2021 and 2022. The Asian Dramaturgs Network, ADN, is formed with the intent of mapping and networking the region's dramaturgical experience and knowledge. At ADN, we have been collaborating with Centre 42 Singapore, and we've held our symposiums in Singapore since 2016. But we've also been around the region with gatherings of dramaturgs, performance makers, arts educators in the Asia Pacific region. And we have actually met in Japan, Australia, and Indonesia for symposiums, conferences, and even a laboratory workshop for dramaturgy. This is all in conjunction with Centre 42 Singapore, who is our principal organizing partner for ADN. For today, we have another series, we have another online event, a special one where it's entitled Ongoing Online, Durational and Digital Dramaturgy. The durational and the digital in performing arts today has been continuing to grow, as even when the world is entering into another period of the coronavirus, which is the endemic period, and where I think we're starting to again experience mobility freedoms of traveling around the world. But having said that, are we still going to continue looking at digital performance as a very viable source of viewing? So we are diving today into the notions of durational dramaturgy in a digital context, specifically looking at a previous performance that was held, or rather it was actually organized by Esplanade Singapore Theatres on the Bay, called 14, which is a 5-hour dance performance with multiple locations. This special event was conceptualized by Taiwan-based Chen Wu-Kang and Horng, and today they joined us with Shawn Chua, who's also Singapore-based, to talk a bit about this particular performance. What is special about this event, again, like I said, is that it brings together the digital and the durational, something that we have only begun to actually explore perhaps in the later part of the pandemic, when we were more fluent with technology, especially digital technology, and obviously getting into grips with digital dramaturgy. For this particular event, I'm very happy and we're very fortunate to have actually dramaturg Dr. Cheng Nien Yuan joining us, who will be the main moderator with Wu-Kang, Chen Wu-Kang, Horng, and Shawn Chua. I will now just very quickly introduce Nien to all of you, who will then take the show away. Nien is a Singaporean performance scholar, educator, and dramaturg. She completed her PhD in theatre and performance studies in the University of Sydney in 2020. Her work involves the politics and poetics of storytelling in the digital age. Since the pandemic, she has been a dramaturg for several works of digital theatre, including Who's There in 2020, that is quite an amazing piece of landmark digital theatre. There's also then Unbecoming in 2021 for Theatre Works Now Festival. Her research has been published on Critical Stages, Studies in Theatre and Performance Paradigm. Nien is currently researching intercultural acting pedagogy at the Intercultural Theatre Institute in Singapore. Without further ado, I'd like to pass this over to Nien. Take it away, Nien.
Thank you so much, Shawn Nien. And hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your Saturday so far. It is my great pleasure today to moderate this roundtable discussion of 14. And the title of this piece stems from the number of days typically mandated for self-isolation. And as theatres themselves have remained in a period of semi-isolation, the artists behind 14 are finding new ways for audiences to experience dance in a state of what I like to call alone togetherness. And I had the privilege to catch 14 post hoc this week in preparation for this session. And instantly, the day after I received the secret link to the recording of the show, I tested positive for COVID-19. So that was how I experienced the show, in isolation, in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness. And one of the best ways, I think, to experience the show, but we can talk more about audiencing later. But without further ado, let me introduce our speakers today, who will talk to us about the event for about 35 minutes before we open it up to a roundtable discussion and a Q&A to the rest of for the rest of the session, including for our Facebook Live viewers. And just a reminder as well for Wu-Kang and Ruey, at any point, if they need to speak in Chinese or Mandarin, we will all chip in and try and translate for everyone, as long as we just want a comfortable, casual conversation about your work. Hope I don't embarrass my half Taiwanese heritage. Okay, Chen Wu-Kang is a Taiwanese dancer and a choreographer. In 2001, Wu-Kang danced with Ballet Tech and Peridance and became the soloist, starting a long-term collaboration with choreographer Elliot Field. In 2004, he co-founded Horse Dance Theatre as an artistic director. And in 2011, he began collaborating with artists in different fields. And his recent works include Dances for Wu-Kang Chen in 2020, which was the recipient of the 2021 Taishin Performing Arts Award, and online streaming works such as Thank You So Much for Your Time in 2019, and Thank You for Staying Home in 2021, and of course 14 in 2021. Shawn Horng is a video designer and director, creating original works internationally since 2008, and he's known for creating large-scale performative multimedia environments which interact with human perception, memories, and uncanny experiences in our daily lives. He is the recipient of the 2020 Lucille Lortel Awards for his projection design in The Headlands, produced by Lincoln Center Theatre, and his design works have been presented in a multitude of renowned spaces, including Broadway, Guggenheim, La Mama, and National Taichung Theatre, among others. Ruey was the visiting artist at the Bennington College and on faculty at Taipei National University of the Arts. And last but not least on this panel, we have Shawn Chua, who was the dramaturg for the Singaporean contingency of this work. And we can talk more about that later. And based in Singapore, he is engaged with embodied archives and canny personhood and the participatory frameworks of play. He has presented his research at the Asian Dramaturgs Network, the Substation, and Performance Studies International, and his works have been presented at the Singapore International Festival of Arts, Singapore Art Week, and the Esplanade. Shawn is a recipient of the National Arts Council Scholarship, and he holds an MA in Performance Studies at the Tisch School of the Arts in New York University. He has served on the PSI Future Advisory Board, or FAB, and has lectured at Singapore Management University and LaSalle College of the Arts. Away to you, gentlemen.
Well, since you say I can speak Chinese, it's really tempting. I probably would just jump in right away in my fluent Chinese. Hey, Shawn Hong, are we going to start sharing this slide? Yes. So I'll pass it to you right now.
Pass it to me?
Right. Yeah, you go right ahead and I'll follow.
Okay. Slideshow. Oh, it doesn't work. Shit. Let me do it this way. Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about 14. So this is 14 is how do I say this? Wu-Kang and we've been collaborating for the past few years, and then when the COVID hit, everything changed. So we just started to have this idea about, because everything was closed and also theater was closed, and we kind of lose our jobs in a moment. So we talk about like how beautiful these empty theaters are, and we should do something for the theaters. So that's how we came up with this idea. How about we have performers doing solos in the theater by themselves? So that's our initial ideas, and then we maybe we do it here, and then what happened next? Oh, and then we had opportunity invitation from the National Theater Taipei. They asked us to propose a digital show to them, and then we came up with this idea, this solo marathon. In one theater, it's only in National Theater Taipei, with 14 minutes solo, 14 hours in total. So that includes 56 performers, and then the COVID situation in Taipei got better, and then the theater starts to open up. Then our project got, just we couldn't do it anymore. So then what happened next was we did our own mini version at Horse, in the rehearsal room at Horse, in June 2020. It was a 1 hour show, a mini version. We had 8 performers. We learned a lot from that process. And then a year after, I guess Wu-Kang got this opportunity to connect with the Esplanade. Theater.
Yeah. Iris call and Faith jump in.
Yeah, and they asked us to consider to do another version, and then we just start to think about how do we do this, and then they said maybe we can try to do it cross country, cross venues. It was wild. So we started to talk about how do we do this. And that's why we came up with this what you're currently seeing, this page. We're thinking about using internet to connect all the satellites, meaning all the venues internationally. And we have cameras to sort of being our digital eyes to look through, to kind of witness what happens in the theaters. And then, so what you can see here, the main stage, meaning is the stage in each venue. And then we have artists, cameras, and commentators all witnessing the moment. And then we have internet, like transmit and double channeling back and forth to Taipei, and also sending back to the commentators so they can commenting while we are watching the performance. And then everything is sending back to the Horse and then goes to the website. So that's our main technical theory. And then next page, this is sort of the snapshots of the show. Wu-Kang, do you want to talk about the commentators a bit?
Oh, because I think, sorry, I have to go rewind a little bit in time. So all this start from our friendship between me and Ray, because in the beginning we get to know each other and we realize, oh, we both like sport, watching basketball game. And then we start to collaborate, but we don't want to work for each other. We want to work together. So we start to have this. We start to build this relationship of like sort of a decentralized, not serving each other kind of relationship, and we bring this relationship to every project that we built together. So also, we use this method in this work as well. So the commentator part in our MIDI version, we we find an anthropologist to commenting the whole performance, and we think that really went very well. It has a very therapeutic feeling, hearing the performance and watching what's happening, and from a different aspect of commenting. So we want to extend that into this, and as you can see, we have 5 screens showing the commentator, and each one, they can all be controlled separately. So it really depends on what language you speak, and you can turn the value up or down, and you can adjust them. And for myself, my personal choice is just put everything to the loudest, and to test my ear, how I receive the information. And strangely, because we think most of the digital performance, it's so hard to focus, and we keep getting distracted all the time. So we wanted to put all the extraction possible into the frame. So keep the audience or spectator on the other side of the computer very busy, listening to this language and comparing the different language, if you know both, and comparing the information with what you see at that moment. And sometimes you realize, oh, I'm not really interested in their point of view, and I value more of my point of view. And so this thoughts process is what interests us. That's why we really enjoy and having this commenting, and they did wonderful performance. It's like Olympic, because somehow they have this angle of what should I say? Right, when their performer is performing, it's like their home game. So the commentator will really have the sparks, like try their best to tell you how good Italian is, how good they are, and when it's Taiwan's turn, how good they are, and Indonesia the same. So this competitive feeling is really keep it very exciting. Right.
Okay. And there's one thing I want to share is during the process, because it's cross country. Oh, hey, I'm talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So because it's cross country, and then everybody was working remotely, like at our home. So the strategies becomes so crucial. Like, how do we work together but not together? So Wu-Kang and I just start to think about, maybe we should just develop this structure that it's almost like a guideline or a handbook that we could pass it to everybody who's working on this production, and everyone can produce. So we call this thing an artistic outline, and that includes all, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 categories. Starting from the partners, we start to try to explain what's going to happen, because only Wu-Kang and I can kind of know the website's going to be, but it's so abstract because we are in the process. We're still designing the website and also working on this outline. So this is almost like our Bibles. So that we could share with all the partners. So, and then we're starting from the presenting partners, we describing what is 14, and then and the next category is notes for dramaturgs, and then notes for artists, because we give the freedom to each venue. They will choose their dramaturgs, and dramaturgs will help us to pick the artists, because in each venue, it has its own arc. It has its own theory, why they choose their artists, and how to make sense across all the performances. And then we have notes for the commentators, like how we, like what you should do and what you should avoid. Basically, they can do whatever. They just witness and chat. And then the next category is the cameras, because this is important, because we want to, it's almost like a gift to the performers. We want to give them space. We want to give them a mental space, even, so they take the ownership of the theater. So during the show, during each solos, there's nobody behind the cameras, or there's no crew around the performer. The performance is doing we call it a real solo, the authentic solo in this big theater. And between each solos, there's we call this interludes, and we name it, we call this gazing theater. So we ask each venue to shoot 4 solos, 4 interlude videos pre-recorded, and the topic is gazing theater, so they can just pick whatever they think we can contemplate. Yeah, and then the next one, the endings, the solo bowing, this one's also pre-recorded. Yeah, because we're imagining maybe at the end we can do this a special bowing moment, which turned out pretty cool, I think. And then we describe the website, what the website might look like. There's multiple windows. The main stage will be switched between venues, and the commentators, they are always with the audience, but the audience gets to control the website. We built all the functions, all the buttons on and off, so they have the freedom to control. So this artistic outline was so important for us, and also for everyone else, all the partners, all the performers. And then I want to show some photos from backstage. This one was the control room. So everything, all the signals was sending in from all 5 countries to Taipei in this control center. And then we will send the signal back to each countries, because the commentator has to see it live, so they can commenting. So that makes it so complex. And then this diagram on the right side was just, we were chatting with the vendor there, and
it was the first day.
Yeah, this was the first day we approached them, and the guy was, yeah, he was so smart. He gets our idea, and then he was trying to explain to us how we could do it. Yeah, just mesmerizing moment. Next one. Yeah. It was so fun, because it's like we had endless meetings at our home, and then the show happened. It just, so it's almost unreal. I never done this. I never worked in theater this way, because Wu-Kang and I, only the horse team gets together at the very last week when everyone else was in tech in their theaters. So yeah, just want to share this. I think this was our last slide. Wu-Kang, do you have anything else to share?
Yeah, and it's a strange ride because usually you decide what to do, but in this process we have to learn to decide not to do and not to interfere. And on the other side, the collaborating partner or artist, they also learning how to take control because
好多位冇人應該好難直音，
what?
音快音錄音係
What?
Somebody is interjecting into the. I think it's one of our audiences. We'll try and mute them. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, it's okay. I was so happy that to have somebody hike into the
Please continue,
Zoom
Wu-Kang.
meeting.
And I think it was Cantonese, wasn't it? It was kind of strange.
not so sure.
Please continue.
So sure. So each layers has each responsibility to generate material, and we as host team, we need to learn how not to interfere and how to open up spaces. But in the beginning, all the collaborating artists continue to ask us for more guidance, because in the beginning it feels like, oh, we are the boss, we are going to tell you what to do. And so it also shows the relationship, the local art, performing arts environment, how things were come together, like the theater, and they have money, and they find artists, and they gather the artists they like, and they gather the dramaturg they like, and commentator they like, and they assemble. And who are not involved are just some, well, too bad. But it shows this power structure, which during the process, we just enjoy observing these small things. Yeah. And thank you for inviting us. Thank you all inviting us, putting this discussion together, so me and Ray and Shawn can get together once again and talk about it and trying to recall all those small excitement back. Thank you.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing. That answered quite a few questions that I already had. But I think for now, maybe I just want to share screen for the audience for this. Just to give them a taste of what it would have been like. Because there's some components on the screen as well that are very interesting. So for example, like the rolling comments also from the audience. Could you, maybe later we can talk a little bit more about that. Let's move on to Shawn first, but or maybe now just say a few words about that comment section. Yeah. Ray or Wu-Kang? Yes.
Oh, Ray, 你讲我讲，你讲好了。
The commenting thing was, I guess the story was coming from the mini version we did, because last time we had 6, I guess, let me count, 6 cameras. And then we just think about maybe we shouldn't do the editing ourselves. We should give the freedom we should make it so chaotic so the audience couldn't handle. So we just open up 6 different channels on internet. So like including Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, all kinds. And with all different contents, but it's simultaneously happening together. And then we had a chat room open up in Google So the audience, they can chat with us in the back room, in our green room, and also chat they can leave messages. But it turned out to be like almost too much for the audience. So because they need to handle too many things in the same time. So that's why for the 14, we decided we should make an interface. We should make it a little bit easier for the audience so they can get as much as possible, but also they can focus. So that's why we have this commenting thing, this wording thing coming, happen. We try to build this so from our side we can also feed in information, but also the audience, they can also say things, which it might happen something because performance can see it live, so it might happen to them. They might respond to it. So this is how we develop this how to exchange ideas between the audience and the performance in cyberspace. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's also a wonderful way of being together, I suppose, and seeing all these being together with the other audience members. And I mean, when I was watching this alone, really alone because it was over already, it was nice to see the little ghosts of the previous audience members kind of commenting. Some of them, have very funny comments.
Did you try to type? Because it works.
Does it work? Okay,
Yeah,
I will try right now. Testing. I'm not a robot. And
hope it works.
No, it doesn't work. Or maybe it's at the end.
It usually takes a little bit time.
I see. No, I didn't go to the sad extent of trying to comment by myself into this void. But okay, and then and as they were talking about the commentators, this is one of my favorite parts of the show, of course. I was listening to Charlene a lot, of course, because she's a good friend of mine, Singaporean. But I was also listening to everybody else, and they all have very different styles of commenting. So it was really great.
一个彩色的，一个黑白的。
Anything else that we might have missed?
Juxtaposizione di immagine.
Yeah.
Dan kamera yang.
Anything else we might have missed from this interface? We have the list of.
No.
What is this button? Oh. Okay.
That's the main page. Yeah.
Right. I see. Okay. Yeah, maybe we can speak a little bit more later on. But for now, why not we move on to Shawn?
Hey, thanks so much for inviting me as well. And I think like what Wu-Kang said earlier, like it's so interesting to think about the work again after this like span of time since the work was out, right? Because I think the project was so ambitious, on so many scales, and I think. But then also like where the different kinds of countries came in, we didn't have like a lot of lead time also, right? So a lot of the kind of discovery was happening simultaneously, right? Like I think a lot of us wasn't really sure what the infrastructure of the website might look like, how would the different pieces come together. A lot of it was just like a lot of trust also, but also like trying to figure out like what the language of the performance was, right, with each other. Because on one hand, while the score was very clear in terms of what the parameters of each of the different modules were, like there were also like different kinds of interpretations and nuances that only became clearer when we were iterating and trying different things, right, with each other and seeing how some of those pieces come together. So yeah, I have a little bit of a presentation. Let me just share that. Hang on. So this might help to at least like put some images. So what I'll be doing is I'll be focusing on the slideshow. Okay. Can anyone see the screen like well? Okay. So what I'll be doing is, so I'm Shawn, I'm one of the dramaturgs. As we've heard earlier, 14 is essentially a kind of like meta structure, right? Within that meta structure, there are 5 different kinds of contingents, one of which is the Singapore contingent, and I'm the dramaturg for the Singapore contingent. There's a dramaturg attached to each of these 4 other contingents. What I was doing is I worked very closely with the 4 artists, which I will talk about a bit later, with Esplanade, with the filmmaker Wei, as well as the light designer Genevieve, as we kind of put this work together. And what you're seeing on screen right now is actually what the performers are seeing, right? So actually, like there's this like countdown timer within the Esplanade that they have to, so they get a sense of exactly when the performance is meant to be wrapped up, because I think Wu-Kang and Ruey made it very clear that they were very strict with the 14 minutes, right? At the 14 minutes, it will cut. So this was kind of a prompt for some of the performers. So actually what I'm showing you are kind of like not really what the audience is seeing, but like the kind of behind the scenes a little bit. So for the Singapore side, we were working with 4 artists. Well, the first one you're seeing in front is, Sandia's performance, right? So, and so the 4 artists we had was Sandia, Hashima, this is Rizman, and Daniel Koch. And when I was talking to each of the artists, I think what was very interesting was, so remember this was at a time in the pandemic, this was like in September, right? Where I think things were still very uncertain. They were kind of like opening, closing, opening again. Like there was a lot of uncertainty. For many of these artists, we haven't actually stepped into like the Esplanade Theatre and just for a while, right? And remember, this is the Esplanade, the huge Esplanade Theatre, not the black box, right? So I remember one of the first.
Oh no.
Did we lose Shawn?
This is the reality of.
Okay.
Am I back?
Yes,
Yeah,
you're back.
you're back.
Oh, sorry, where do you lose me at?
Something about this is the time of the pandemic.
Right.
Yeah.
Begin from there again.
Yeah.
Right, I was talking about uncertainty and instability, so I think that was very performative. So this is a time of pandemic where there's lots of uncertainty. We didn't know when things were opening or closing, and so for many of these artists, they haven't like been in the theatre for a long time, right? And remember, this is the Esplanade Theatre, right? So not the black box, but the big Esplanade Theatre. So one of the first questions we're talking about is actually what is our relationship with this specific theatre, with this specific space? And while I think a lot of us were kind of romanticizing, right, about this kind of beautiful, forlorn theatres that have been abandoned during the time of pandemic, I think there were also lots of questions about actually, because these 4 artists, they were all like independent practitioners where, to be honest, like most of us wouldn't have access to that huge Esplanade Theatre. So ironically, if there wasn't COVID, the opportunity to even like use that space, right, might not have been there. So there was that question of like, is this even like a space, like, is this really home, right? It might feel like home on a symbolic sense, but in a specific relationship, I think, some like Rizman or Daniel might have like entered that space like more than a decade or so ago, right? And when the space was first opening. So I think the first question is just navigating actually what is our ambivalence with this space. And because of that, I think each of the artists were occupying like very interesting kinds of interventions into the space itself, right? So for Sandia, she decided to go with a very, very minutiae of the feet, right? Tapping on her training as an Odyssey dancer, for example. So the first shot, we see of Sandia is, she's coming from the seats in the audience, right? And we just see like the first half of the 14 minutes, it's just like the kind of micro movements of the feet before she comes up, and we see this kind of very presentational performance, right? I think like Sandia's was the most presentational, whereas like when we had Hashima, right, who recently gave birth, and she was experimenting with the bingkong, which is the something that you wrap around your body after childbirth, right? So we with Hashima, we talked a lot about what does it mean to rehabilitate the body, but by extension to rehabilitate the space of the theater, right, after this long absence. So if you look at the image, like Hashima was working with this staircase is actually in one of the wings of the theaters, actually. So you can see the kind of bingkong like draping around the space, right? And so we were really thinking about what does it mean to think about the theater as a kind of body, right, that we were wrapping around. And so that was a kind of extension and relation that she was experimenting with, and trying to feel that space. And her energy with that space was almost spiritual, ritualistic almost, right? With a kind of gravitas in which she was moving through and conducting the space. And for Rizman was staying with the dressing room, because we were talking about how actually for most performers, ironically, you spend most time in the dressing room than on the stage itself, right? So the dressing room as this space of intimacy, and Rizman was experimenting a lot with the breath, right? That starts to become this something else that animates the space, and experimenting with all these kinds of infinity mirrors and projections within the space itself. And of course, and I believe Daniel's came all the way at the end, right? So we started with a very presentational work with Sandia's, and with Daniel's, and actually the whole process of working with Daniel was an interesting one as well, because he was coming back from I think it was Ireland at that time, so he didn't have the VTL thing available. So he was actually, a lot of the kind of correspondence was happening during his 14-day hotel quarantine, right? So there's a meta layer to this, in which he was pulling his piece together. And so with Daniel's piece, it was a very campy, very energetic one that completely like deconstructed the space of the theater. He was running around all the way from the very, very end of the backstage all the way into the audience. So the kind of entire disorientation of space itself. And with, I think we talked a little bit about the commentators already. So for us, we had Charlene, of course, who was our commentator. And I think what was very interesting was how each of the commentators were bringing very different kinds of energies towards the way in which they're talking about the performance. Like, for example, I remember that Susan, right, was kind of very diligently annotating every single part of the performance, whereas I remember the commentator for Taiwan was, was so candid, right, and she was eating and she was commenting in such a lively way. It's almost as if like you're watching a variety TV show, for example, and with Charlene, we had lots of conversations about storytelling, right, and oral traditions of the storytelling. And I remember we were talking about how, in older kinds of oral traditions, right, like it's always about that kind of long durational time, that kind of cyclical repetitions that are happening, right? And what are the kind of rhythms of speaking and talking? How does information so we're playing with those kinds of cadences. And I remember one of the things was also to give space to silence as well, right? To give space to that which cannot be communicated. So not to kind of overwrite the performance with the speaking, but to think about how the speaking becomes like a kind of partner with what we're seeing on stage as well. So I think one of the kind of metaphors that we were playing with was also, what if we think about the commentators as a kind of chorus leader, right? Like if we think about the kind of dramaturgy of Greek tragedies, right? And so these commentators are there kind of guiding and initiating us as the spectators, right? Who is trying to make sense of what is the kind of performative context of this experiment. And they are there to kind of walk us through. And what was very interesting is that because we had 5, it wasn't just a singular voice either, that you could as the audience, you had the kind of agency to permutate, right? Like with these five, either kind of alternating or cross-cutting them, and feeling which are the kind of affinities with which commentators you were feeling with each of those performances. I think at this point, I kind of wanted to take a step back, right? Because I think the frame that was posed to me was to think about the digital and the durational. And I remember, like, what is a durational performance? And I was thinking about whether I would necessarily consider 14 a durational performance. And so here I kind of am very much inspired by dance scholar Andre Lepecki in thinking about durational performance, right? So for him, duration, he talks about how duration is not time extended. Actually, duration has little to do with extension or other spatial references. Duration endures a profound transformation in which time is no longer measured, assessed, inserted into an economy, but is felt. So here, Lepecki is inspired by Henri Bergson, right? And thinking about duration, and where duration is not about. I think oftentimes when we say this is a durational piece of art, we think about it as like a very long performance, right? As an extended period of, like, longer than the usual performative parameters of time that we are used to, right? So anything that's more than an hour and a half or 2 hours for performance, for example, oftentimes that's the way in which it circulates. But I think Lepecki's intervention here is to think about how actually something can be a second, and that could be profoundly durational, right? And because for him, to think about the durational is to exceed the kind of chromonormativity, right, in which time is usually disciplined, right, of the 30 minutes, of the 1.5 hours, etc. And so with the way in which he's thinking about durational art and durational performances, it's about that quality in which that kind of measured time is dissolves, right, to allow for a different kind of way in which time is felt, liberated from chromonormativity. So if I apply that kind of lens or frame to think about a work like 14, it's very interesting because on one hand, the 14 minutes is so exact within 14, right? Like that is the whole parameter of the work, that the measurement of time is so specific. But at the same time, it's precisely because it is meant to echo that kind of 14-day duration, that kind of durational quality of the quarantine, right? In which, how are we inhabiting that time, that kind of counting down, or is it that within that very strict parameters, we are free to experiment with a different kind of rhythm of creation, of thinking about the work, etc. So on one hand, there is that kind of formal parameter, but I think to me, what is the most durational aspect of the work? And to me, what I consider actually might be the protagonist of the work is actually the commentators, because it's really because they are the ones who are sitting there, right, for that 5 hours. Of course, we said that they could eat, they could rest, and all of that, and some of them did, right. But at the same time, their presence was still with us for those 5 hours, right? And so I remember Charlene like sharing a little bit about some of those, like how like being sensitive to that energy as well, and kind of leaning into the moments of exhaustion, for example, or when like a work really pulls her or not, right? And so for me, like there was something that was fascinating about that layer in terms of how it in some ways as an audience, I was almost like rooting for the commentators as well, right? As they introduce us to a different way of thinking about not a kind of focused time in which like you have to be like fully present or whatever, but like how do you accompany a work, right? With this varying degrees of focus, distraction, and all of that. Which then I think maybe leads me a little bit to the sense of the digital. I mean, I think then the question that I was considering then is what are the kind of different registers of duration and the digital that's happening within a work like this, right? Because there's also the kind of durational quality, like thinking about time and duration on film versus performance was also something that we were discussing a lot about, right? Like I remember one of the conversations I had with Ruey when we were trying to find different kinds of ways of framing the work was, I think my provocation to him was to think about not to turn dance into film, but to think about how the film becomes deformed by the dance as well, right? So what that also meant was that, for example, having to unlearn the kind of, like, I think as a filmmaker for him, it's always about the cuts, right? Like after a few moments, we have to cut. We have to keep like sustaining the audience's energies by cutting to different shots. Whereas, like, I think for us, we're thinking about how do we sustain the integrity of that presence, right? That liveness. Can we hold that for a little bit longer than is usually comfortable for a kind of filmic form, for example? So there is that kind of degree of thinking about duration, but then there's also the degree of thinking about what does duration or focus or presence mean in a digital space where our attention is often like perforated by like all these other things that are happening, right? Like a WhatsApp message that's coming in right now, or checking my email, or someone walking in at the back. How do we not deny those kinds of presence, but they kind of pull that and acknowledge that as the kind of basis and paradigm of thinking of this presence and co-sharing of time and space. And in many ways, that's not new, right? Because like I'm thinking about the kind of like wayang performances that are very long, right? That are durational, that you can kind of step away for a while, come back, you're kind of talking to someone as you're watching the work, you know, that actually this kind of being in a black box, being very quiet, watching a thing with full focus for 1.5 hours. I mean, that is actually the what is abnormal, actually, right? That's actually quite a recent kind of intervention in itself. So I mean, these are some of the questions that are kind of mulling in my head as I'm revisiting and thinking about the work within these, I guess, parameters of thinking about duration and digital. I think I'm just going to stop here for now. I'm sure like we can unpack or chat about some of these things together. But yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Yeah, I literally wrote in my notes that the commentators were the most durational aspect of this durational performance. And, you know, they are the constant presence throughout the show. And we watch them we watch them, you know, becoming stiff, fidgeting, stretching, hunching over. You know, it's a fascinating disjunct from what we are seeing with the dancers, you know, and we see also the commentators' attention tuning in and out, you know, sometimes looking at their phones, like you're talking about, you know, somebody's going for dinner and going to the toilet and things like that. And it's a wonderful thing to watch, actually. And it's also a wonderful kind of reflection as to what attending to a digital show, especially a durational one, usually means. You know, people can easily tab in and tab out, literally, like and so I for one was very delighted when the Taiwanese commentator, when Daniel Kok came on, and she just started standing up and she started dancing. She's like, I've got this mic, I've got this wire, but I don't care, I'm just gonna dance. Who cares? The theater is your playground. And it was great, you know. It's something particularly unique, I think, about the digital age. The idea of watching someone watch something, even if it's yourself. I'm currently watching myself. It's something very particular about Zoom in that sense. We are very used to watching a copy of ourselves, but to as an audience member, to watch another audience member. I mean, I also think about things like YouTube reaction videos, right? This kind of commentating also reminded me of that. And I was wondering, if I wish the commentators were here, I was wondering what kind of prep did they have to go through for this performance? Did they have to rehearse? I don't know, Shawn, do you know if Charlene had to rehearse for her, besides, you know, your own dialogues with her?
Yeah, so So I think what was interesting was because we did have a few runs, right? And I think for Susan, I think she was almost like there for all the runs, right? And I think the Thai commentators, I saw that he was there for a lot of it as well. I think for Charlene, I think we were quite deliberate about, okay, let's only bring her in when necessary, right? So I think we did a bit of the tech stuff, but then I think I wanted her to kind of just respond to the works fresh and live, right, as she was seeing it. So in terms of rehearsal, I don't think there is much of that. But I think there were lots of conversations about I think a lot of the conversations were dwelling more in the realm of the what does it mean to think about storytelling, right, as a kind of medium, and then what kind of like bodily prep that requires, what kind of food should we lay around the area, how do we like adjust the space such that the light isn't like shining into our eyes for 5 hours, right? And so it's those kinds of considerations that we're playing with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I felt very like, when she was like, oh, what is your body doing now? Because I was worried for her body. I was like, what? You're sitting for so long, like, Charlene, are you okay? But and she said, what is your body doing now? And I mean, my body is pretty bad at the moment. I mean, I have COVID, so it was really nice to have that dialogue. Just as I'm watching the show.
And I thought what was very like affirming also was to because I think the brief, right, from Ruey and Wu-Kang was very generous for the commentators as well, right? It's like you can take a break, you can eat, you can rest, you can etc. And I think oftentimes as audience members, we, especially people who have been used to going to performances pre-COVID, we are very prone to being very harsh on ourselves, right? I keep seeing people or hearing people talk about how guilty they feel for being like bad audience, right? For not being able to pay attention to the work, or having to like constantly like just to get through like a 1.5 hour recording, they have to split it over like 6 sittings, etc. And I think by watching these commentators being distracted, being not fully present in that usual way in which we imagine the kind of contract an audience needs to have for the performance, that kind of gave it felt like it gave the audience permission also, right? And affirmed that actually it's fine wherever you are at, that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so Shawn has given us a very detailed rundown of at least the Singaporean contingent as a dramaturg within a specific contingent. But I'm interested in overall, because dramaturgy is a lot about sequencing, right? What comes one after the other, And so how did you all decide, as I suppose directors of the show, how did you decide which performance came next, or the sequence of the performance? I know Daniel Kong is like, of course, that's the end, that's the finale. But yeah, how did that come? Oh, really?
It was pure luck.
No.
Yeah, it was pure luck. Because we didn't get to see it before, like a few days before the show.
So it's purely random, this sequence?
Yeah. No. We got some information from dramaturg, knowing what the performer is going to do, and some performers we saw before we decided. But a lot of the performers we didn't get to see it, and we had to make the decision through just the information dramaturg provided us. So we just randomly, and we got lucky. Daniel Koch was the last.
Yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful, for those of you who don't know, I mean, he just came out guns blazing. I mean, I want to see if I can show a little bit of it, just a little. Can you all see? Oh, wait.
Woo! Let's go! Show me your muscle!
Yeah, so that was, and yeah, even the Taiwanese commentator was like, yeah, of course, he's the finish, he's the end, what a way to end, yeah, so that was why I was wondering, how did y'all decide how to sequence? So really, it was just all based on textual information that you got.
Right.
I can say a little bit. So we had 5 rehearsals. I say rehearsals meaning with all tech stuff ready, and we had total 5. And then the first 3 was just figuring out the technical issues. So we didn't really rehearse anything. So until the last 2 was on the horse team, we could actually, and also for everyone else, can actually see what's happening besides their own country. So before then, I guess we only got the written descriptions from each venue, each dramaturg saying what they might want to do for each artist. So it's a gamble. We sit down and then we just figure out, we talk through, maybe this here, maybe Rasman could be the intermission. We try to put him in the middle, and then maybe someone can be in the beginning. Maybe Daniel, maybe he could be the end. So, and we got lucky.
Yeah, and we got lucky. And also I remember in the beginning, we also asked each dramaturg to give us some suggestion if he thinks that this piece should stay in the middle or towards the end or after intermission. They please do suggest. So those information helps.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, Shawn, did you want to add something about that sequencing, or what did you suggest?
Yeah. So I think for us, the arc was quite clear actually. So we decided we wanted to play with Sandia's very presentational performance as like near the start, and then you're kind of almost moving through the stage, right? So you start from the audience seat, you go up to the stage, and then you go to the wings, and then we were saying that actually Risman's would be good as an intermission, right? Because you're going backstage, right? And it's almost like the relationship between that space and the stage is not spatially obvious, and then kind of rounding off with Daniel's that brings us back into the audience area. And because of that order as well, there were certain kind of decisions about the frames, right? Because initially, I think in Sandia's one, we did want to kind of review the theater space, but because we decided but later on we decided maybe we can reveal the space in Daniel's piece, right? So with Sandia's one, we keep it tight to the kind of proscenium arc, but not so much the audience side of the space itself. So there was a kind of graduated reveal of an initiation into the space.
Right. Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, as moderator, I suppose I have the responsibility of saying that please put in your questions in the chat at any point you like. And also for the Facebook live audience, please also just comment wherever you are, and the Center 42 team will communicate your questions to us. So yes, it's not just me asking questions over here. Hao-Nian can also jump on at any point. And yeah, about the Sandia, was it Sandia's piece? Yes, it was very spectacular. It was like kind of theater magic at some points, but then I also really liked how it cut to the interlude, which is just like bang. Okay, that's just house lights on. Yeah, it's just So that was a really nice transition actually. Okay, so my next question is about when you transpose a performance into a digital space. My friend, the artist Javon Chandra, always like to say, everything becomes multimedia. If you are a dancer, if you are an actor, you are a stage manager, whatever. Doesn't matter what role you are. In my experience, everybody, including dramaturg, everybody has become an expert in multimedia or a kind of a multimedia artist, even a film director. Everybody needs to understand framing, camera angles, technological affordances, directing themselves in some way. And in 14, you see a little bit of that. You see a lot of dancers directing themselves, I suppose, framing themselves. And do you think this is the future of being an artist in a post-pandemic age? You know, that these kinds of skills and knowledges are now necessary to become an artist, a dancer or a dramaturg, doesn't matter what role you play. Yeah. Wu-Kang, you can speak in Chinese. You can speak in Chinese.
Yeah, I want to hear from Wu-Kang because I'm jumping in right now simply
Okay.
because that this is not we're talking about 14, but obviously Wu-Kang as an artist, as a dance artist, has spent, I think, spending quite a bit of time thinking and actually even philosophizing about what it means to dance in front of the camera, what it means to dance digitally. Yeah, like I said, 14 for me was a very layered, complex, and rich experiment whom he undertook with Ray. But on his own, his musings, I think, the thinking behind digital dance, online live digital dance also goes beyond 14, or perhaps 14 is the product of it after a long period of doing other stuff, which is why this question is very interesting. I would definitely like to hear from Wu-Kang. Please.
Yes, I think there's a engine, there's a drive to survive. So this is the need to survive, and where is the resource? And we jump in and we study, and during the process, and we gain the knowledge, and we gain the knowledge of understanding what we're lacking, and understanding that we can never compete in a digital performance. I mean, digital format like Netflix. And it's during pandemic, this 3 years is so clear that we're losing. We just leave really happily, because I think it's so interesting that the performing arts in theater is a very, I would say, old tradition, right? I mean, of course, it's not Taiwan's tradition, coming from Europe or other country, but this performing arts lively has a long history, not like a digital performance. So, but we immerse ourselves in this culture, and we are preserved by the government, and we continue to evolve into a contemporary art, a contemporary performing arts. But at the same time, the mainstream pop culture or movie and other medium are just exploding. And so this is the moment we get to meet at the same platform. And wow, my God, no compete. And so it's very interesting 3 years. And this will somehow help us to continue to think, because I mean, luckily, when we do work, we don't need to. We don't always have to tell a story. I think that's our advantage. That we still we know there's some value, even though they don't turn into money. Or 流量是什么啊？
Oh no.
Viewing numbers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, viewing numbers.
Yeah.
Like any little beginner of YouTuber has more viewer than 14 altogether. So there's no compete. And but we are doing some other stuff. We're doing some other stuff. I just feel lucky that we get to work on this project. And I must say that Faith and Iris and like Esplanade are so smart, very smart, to putting this together, because they have to pull a lot of stuff, and And in the beginning, they have to push us. It's to ask us to expand our idea, to collaborate with international collaborator, and how we change the idea of 14 and including more people. Yeah, it's lucky, really.
I've got another question, which I think Wu-Kang didn't quite expand on, and maybe it was cheeky, naughty of him not to, but he left a very strong impression on me, what he said just now. I think for this particular event 14, there has been actually a lot of stress on, or rather the emphasis is on the dramaturgs and on dramaturgy. And I am quite sure I read it in Ray's presentation just now, where it did say something to the fact that the dramaturgs were the one who chose the dancers. Am I correct? Yeah. And then this was followed by what Wu-Kang said just now, where because of this, it became almost a political commentary, where from where Wu-Kang and Ray were sitting, they could see who are the ones being chosen, who are the ones not being chosen. And this, for me, was strengthened by what Shawn said about his choice or his curatorial thrust of the Singapore dancers, of these dancers who may never see actually the main stage of a national theatre like Esplanade because of the kinds of works they do, and therefore also to reframe in a way what they were doing. And again, it is political. So two things come to mind. One is that we actually see the dramaturg here, and I really would push the idea where you are not just looking at dramaturgs already in this particular event 14. Ray and Wu-Kang, I think what you have been doing is you have been collaborating with curators, right? You've been working with curators, with dance curators who have curated mini programs, right? You have not just one dancer. You have 4 dancers with 4 different programs putting together what the traditional Western idea of a dance concert is about. So you have dance concert from each country being put together in a bigger dance concert of global scale, right? But these dance concerts from each country is actually curated by a dramaturg, no less, but still the work is, I feel, bigger, because dramaturgy, we always think of, when we talk about dramaturgy, there's always this idea of it, of a particular project or particular performance. But here's the dramaturg having to look bigger and further and zoom out a bit more, where they are looking at the big picture. And I think kudos to the both of you for actually putting, or rather working with dramaturgs in that position. I think I would say I'm envious of Shawn, who's been involved in this, because not many of us as dramaturgs get to curate special programs like this. And that's meta in so many ways already, right? And also then the dramaturgy of, this was in just pre-pandemic, ADN actually had a series of events where we were looking at dramaturgies of technology. And so to actually say that this event, to call it digital and durational, I feel that now I am lacking some insight also. I think it should be dramaturgy of technologies, because you're dealing with not technologies of just the body, as Shawn has so insightfully revealed to us in his own curatorial way of looking at the dancers, but the technologies also come from really hardware. We are talking about a grasp of the technicals that we've never had to before, right? Before this, Nien was laughing at me because I still do not know how to blur my background for Zoom. And here you have Ray just now giving that amazing slide you know, of how things are working and how the movement of technicals are going to be. So for me, these two are very pertinent things that because of this event here, we are looking at the politics of such an event, you know, of who's being chosen, who's being represented, who's not being represented, and also then actually shedding light on the bigger ramifications or the bigger ideas of technology, where I think, Wu-Kang, you're right to say that with this kind of technological knowledge, we definitely are looking at competing with Netflix, right? And this is a seed, because it's interesting you brought up Netflix. Netflix started as a video store.
I used to rent them.
There you go.
When I was in New York, always. Yeah,
there you go.
So interesting. They got so big.
Precisely. So we are talking about that. And again, going back to what Nien said about the future, for the two of you, especially Ray and Wu-Kang, and Ray, because of your technical knowledge, where does 14 go, or is there going to be another 14, or what other kinds of the potentiality of such an event as 14 can be done, is a question that I would like to address to both of you also.
And just adding on to that, and not to waste what 14 was, like, what is the archival future of 14 going to be like?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So hard, because this involves a lot of detail that we haven't discussed and addressed, such as copyrights. Because me and Ray, none of us owns 14. We only draw the outline, and all the content were developed by the artist, and the footage, the angle was decided by another person. So when it put together, it became 14, and so we haven't really talked about it or decide what's the copyright. And for now, we just have this secret link that we can sometime late in the night or during quarantine, just open it up to make sure that, oh, it was really there and it actually exists for now. And because we decided to get this website, and some of my friends who watched the show for 5 hours, and at the end they just say, where can I get this software? That's all they wonder. They want to use this software for meeting. And for the, I don't know, Ray, do you know the future of this project?
It is still unclear. I think first thing, because we did 14 during pandemic, now we're almost hitting the post-pandemic, so that's why people were watching. I think that's one part. And next part is it only belongs to internet, which means belongs to nobody. Like, for example, like, because we did the show and then we did this production, and we expect to have some feedbacks from whoever saw it, but we never really, I mean, I didn't really hear a lot from people. And also I was trying to look up online. There's no critics, like people didn't really write about this. It's gone. It evaporates after the show. So which makes me curious. Like where does it belong? Like, because we built this venue on the website, so the website becomes the home for this performance.
And I am sure that me and Ray, we invest a lot of time talking about the creativity and of this project. Oh, how oh, we have never seen this part, how we never seen how they use this idea and all that. But at the end, it feels, some of my friends would consider, oh, it's just a platform. And we, okay. You didn't create anything because other people create. So all these layers are still, we're still digesting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this uncertainty. I can't believe nobody has critiqued or I really can't believe it, because this is just such a gigantuous project. But you're right, because I also only heard of it when Cheng Nien sent me the email about it. Shawn, you work with archives a lot. Do you have a kind of an ideal vision for the future of 14?
Yeah, no, actually, there is one review in the Straits Times by Melissa Kwek, so at least one exists. Whether it covers the whole ambition of the project, that's a different, like, I think that's the interesting question, right? Like, what is 14? You know, is it just about the specific works, or is it about the infrastructure, or is it about the process, right? Like, what are the parts that should be documented? And I think, you know, I think I'm just come back to that earlier point that Nien was sharing earlier, right? In terms of viewing the work post after the performance itself. And so the thing, coming back to the digital and the durational, the interesting
Switch off camera.
For a lot of like digital works, the performance is the archive, right? Like the moment that it is screened online, that constitutes the artifact of the archive as well. There's no, whereas like, you know, in the past when it's like a natively live physical performance, then the recording becomes a kind of shadow of that, right? Whereas like in the paradigm when things are happening digitally, that is the work, right? And I'm thinking about what is the durational quality? What happens when we think about archives as a kind of durational performance, right? That maybe 14 doesn't end after those 5 hours. Maybe 14 continues every time like that. Like when Nien was watching it, you know, it was still part of the performance. She can still comment on it. She is still interacting with a community of other kinds of audiences reacting to it, right? And I was just thinking like maybe all kinds of archives should include that kind of audience reaction, audience co-presence, you know, in terms of how a work is being documented as well. So I think that was one thing that came to my mind. And I think the other thing that I wanted to also offer was, this is slightly in reference to an earlier question, right, about the competition between live performance and digital theatre. I think it's helpful maybe to also like not think of it as a kind of zero-sum game that we need to be in competition about, but rather I don't even think that it's about trying to think about the transposition of the live into the digital. But I think the challenge or the invitation is for us as artists and performance makers to think about the digital. And I think that the paradigm of the digital is also shifting as we're talking about, right? As you know, like the way in which it incurs into the physical, augments those relationships in different ways, it's becoming more and more complex rather than a kind of binary to begin with. So what happens if we take this digital or hybrid spaces as a new starting point to transcreate, right, our practices, to think about our works anew rather than to try to translate something digital, physical to digital. Like, I think if we think about it from the lens of that kind of transcreation and to start from a very different kind of orienting context, it opens up very interesting possibilities and opportunities as well, potentially. One can hope.
Thank you so much, Shawn. We do have one question from the audience, from Max Yam. Hi, Max. Do we need to prepare, he says, to create and perform in or for the metaverse? Anybody want to tackle this question? Cheng Nien, do you know what the metaverse is?
I was just about to say, I think we need to unpack metaverse a little bit of what it means to different people, different contexts, and actually different platforms, right? Shawn was talking about a lot of things that were meta about 14. The whole exercise of putting together curators with an autonomy to choose dancers is already a meta commentary on the work itself. And then to look at it from a metaverse where we are looking at a world upon another world. So what are we unpacking here from 14? Is Max trying to say that this metaverse, that 14 is a metaverse in itself, where there are many ways of performing it, right? From dancer to cameraman to DOP to commentators? I stop here. Shawn, please.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think so I think just to unpack the metaverse, because I think that's also a word that is used a lot these days to mean very different things. And I think oftentimes when people say metaverse, they're thinking about AR, VR, or specific platforms, right? Whereas I think oftentimes the way in which the metaverse is invoked is more of a paradigm shift. It's a whole ecological shift, right? And the idea about the metaverse is that actually the distinction between the physical and the virtual will be like dissolved, right? There is no kind of binary between the live or whatever, but how the virtual incurs into the physical and vice versa is a lot more complex and a lot more dense, right? So I think the first thing to acknowledge is that the metaverse isn't here yet, right? Because I mean, we can see glimpses of it, but I think one way to read the question as a kind of provocation is to think about how, yes, 14 might be a work that was circulating there's a very different kind of economy of circulation when it's operating online, for sure. But it also has it builds interesting infrastructures in the physical spaces also, right? In terms of the networks of relations that are being forged amongst the participants. Another infrastructure that became very obvious was the technological infrastructures, right? The geopolitical technological infrastructures across different spaces. Yes, the parameters might be similar across for each of us, but like it's very clear like which are the satellites where maybe like the light becomes like almost an interesting aesthetic that incurs into the performance, right? Or that some of the performances had to be pre-recorded because of restrictions that were happening in Bangkok, for example, right? Where all performances had to be cut by a certain time. So I think it's very easy to think about the digital as this like flat homogeneous space, but I think we must remember that that is never the case, right? As audiences, and we still inhabit these spaces in very specific spaces, for example, and to think about what does it mean to then make performances accessible, it becomes a very interesting question to consider also.
Yeah, I absolutely, this was exactly what I wanted to talk about. Sorry, Wu-Kang and Ruey, did you want to add anything? Because I was just struck by this one particular comment rolling through the screen in the performance, which was, the glitches are reflections of the technical circumstances each city faces. Please embrace this creative reality, right? And it was a wonderful acknowledgement of the territory that comes with the digital. And we can talk about glitches as aesthetic, elements. But beyond the idea of glitches being creative reality, I like to draw attention, like what Shawn said, to the possibility of it being the reality of political economy, right? It takes a lot of resources to mount a digital production, especially of this scale and of this quality. And at the same time, there is a huge and widening digital divide in Asia, especially. It's been quite obvious during the pandemic. As urbanized, resource-rich places like Singapore and Taiwan, thrive in this era of digitalization. In less urbanized spaces, with less digital infrastructure, will be left behind. And what does it mean when it comes to making art? When it comes to transnational works, there's always already an uneven distribution of resources, collaborating with people of different countries. But I suspect even more so for digital works, right? So if transnational digital performance is going to be the way forward, in terms of performance collaboration. Oh yeah, we save on plane fares and save on hotel fees and all of that sort of stuff. But do countries like Singapore and Taiwan or places like that have to firstly acknowledge this inequality? And secondly, how do we find ways? Do we have a responsibility to find ways to help artists in other kinds of places navigate this terrain? Did you have to experience this negotiation in 14? I think Shawn already hinted at it earlier. Yeah. I think we have to end with this question. Sorry, we are, I think Horng Nien. Yeah. Yes, Horng Nien messaged me. But yes, please comment on this and then we can wrap up.
I can have a quick thing, and then maybe like Wu-Kang and Ruey can fill in some of the details, right? Because I remember in our conversations, one of the tips, I mean, of course, 14 is a lot about isolation, the solo, being alone. But through the process, we are so aware of how paradoxical that is, right? This is a work that is so ambitious. There's such a huge network of people to make that moment happen requires a whole team of people that we reveal in the kind of transitional photos, right? So on top of solo, we talked a lot about the solidarities, right? How can we think about solidarities across these spaces? How can we think about the kind of redistribution of resources? I'm not sure, and I think maybe like I'm not so privy to the kind of producing side of things, for example, like whether like specific like infrastructures or like Wi-Fi devices were invested from, I don't know, like Esplanade side to support some of the other spaces. But maybe, Wu-Kang and Ruey can share a little bit more about that.
Come on, Ray and Wu-Kang, I'm sure there's a lot to be said about just trying to navigate.
Yeah, we're just
production.
not sure who should start.
Just start. We are running out of time, but we need to hear this.
Oh yes, it's this inequality. It's so obvious right from the start. Yeah, just the Wi-Fi, just the basic Wi-Fi, like Italian. Like, yeah, in Italy, they oh my God, they have very limited choice but that's what they need. And so we need to find solution for each different collaborating partner. And it shows and it reveals the inequality that we think shocking, because we thought it should be very easy, because it took us very long time, not very long, a few meetings with our tech team to think, oh, this is very common. This is very common machine that you can get, and we even check on the internet. Oh, they do have it, but it just, when we in contact with them, it's just so hard for them to get it. So yeah, it shows. And I don't know, Ray, can you?
I don't have too much to talk. Well, I just feel like it's there's no way turning back, and yeah, it's still somehow mirroring the real life situation, because you need so much resources to pull this together, and we've been chosen by other people because we did something here. So I don't know, it's just, it still represents the, yeah.
But no matter what, I think we need to jump in to digital, or at least set one foot in. It's it's like Bitcoin. It's like all this digital stuff that, or the metaverse. You may have your personal reason that you don't want to tap in, but you need to know.
Right.
You need to know what it is. You need to know what it is and what they're playing. And that just by gaining this knowledge, expand my understanding about the world that I didn't know it exists.
Yeah, on one hand, there's something so accessible about the digital, so flat in its hierarchy. As the digital performance is accessible for people who are in wheelchairs. People who cannot afford babysitting, they can just go online and watch it. But so there's something really freeing and accessible about digital performance. But there's also the other side, on the production side of things. You need good camera, you need lots of production resources in order to and I was just in the reason why I asked this also is because I was in a panel the other day organized by a Filipino theater company, and seeing them try to survive, the drive to survive in this pandemic using the digital. They are trying their best to use the digital as well, but it's just they just don't have the same resources and funding that
but I think we still don't have enough people doing it, I think, because we think it's irrelevant, this two world. But once more project or more production being created, we will know more samples, and soon we'll find ways to do digital performance without spending any money.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah,
I think that
is
right now, like before, we are so used to see performers with real set, like a German opera or Pina Bausch, like real set, and later we get to see like no sets at all, and a company on tour without tech people and without even manager, just the performer, two of them with a laptop, and they just tour everywhere. So I think soon we as performer or creator will find a way to tackle this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very, very well put. Paring it down, and making it accessible eventually for all. Okay, I think we have to wrap up. It's 3:40. We are over time, but thank you so much for your time and energy and sharing. It was very, very generous of all of you. Horng Nien, do you want?
So happy to be here. So happy.
Yeah. How do you do this?
I just want to quickly again thank Wu-Kang, Ray, and Shawn to share their experiences with 14, and very big thanks to Nien to moderate this particular session. Just one last word that I like to say is that this thing about inequality, actually, if you look at it, even pre-pandemic, it's always been there. Whether it's technical, whether it's cultural, whether it's financial or political, right? I mean, we can even go on to argue who was the first one who got invited to, I don't know, the Edinburgh Festival. That in itself is already an inequality. But that is where then, for me, the richness of performance comes from. It is because of that kind of inequalities that actually rich performances come from. And then how we deal with the inequalities and the lacks, as Wu-Kang puts it very succinctly, it's a matter of survival, how we want to survive. I know of Indonesian artists for the last 2 years who have turned back to becoming fishermen and farmers. So there are ways. I mean, they are still doing a bit of dancing here and there, but there are ways of surviving. So these are different strategies that we are all trying out, and solidarity is something that I think Shawn rightly says, so that it has to be seen as an effort in solidarity. And for that, Wu-Kang and Ray, I salute the two of you in doing this, and I really hope that you continue in other ways. Yeah, it's not just about dance. I want to stress that actually this is about the technology. And when I say technology, I do not mean hardware. I mean not just hardware, but also in the thinking, in the putting together everything. Thank you very much for this. And on this note, I would like to just wrap this session. And I'd like to thank everyone for staying back to listen. This is not the last one that we have. We have another one tomorrow, actually. This year has been an amazing year for us, starting from last year, where we had a series of e-zines that were put out based on all our conversations, conferences, symposiums, workshops into publications, where we also had these panels to review these publications, which is in a way a trial for us to look at proper publications for Asian Dramaturgs Network's wealth of archives that we have amassed since 2016. And we also, if you go into our website, we have a little map to show where our dramaturgs have, or rather contributing dramaturgs and artists who have actually put their 2 cents into what it means to dramaturg, or what it means to do dramaturgy in Asia. But more importantly, like I said, this is not the last of our series. We have one more tomorrow, starting at 3 p.m. Singapore time, called Translocal Connections, Introducing APEL, which is a special artist network in Berlin, based in Berlin, where they look at a different way of doing residencies, which favors Asian artists. Yeah, and we also will be talking to the founder Ming, who is Singapore born, and he's a co-dramaturg, I would say, in putting together the residency program. Please join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. We'll be talking to Ming, his dramaturg Dana, and also Fiza Manan from Singapore also, who will be our provocateur. On that note, again, let me thank Wu-Kang, Ray, Shawn, and Nien. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to bid goodbye. Good afternoon, good evening, good night to all of you. Thank you.